Let me first start by introducing myself. My name is Carol Ammons. I'm a retiree of the Champaign County Board. Just retired this year, and I'm a new, soon-to-be inducted member of the Urbana City Council. So I'm very happy to be here. It's a pleasure to serve in this capacity. I'm also a member of CU Citizens for Peace and Justice, who's the host organization for the first dialogue that we're having today. We will continue to participate in this process all the way through as I describe a little bit of how we got to this point. During my term on the county board about a year ago, there was some discussion about the condition of the downtown jail, which led us to this conversation today. That discussion has went through a lot of ebbs and flows, so I won't give you all the dirty details, but we've had a great amount of conversation. The one thing I do want to highlight about the conversation is that citizen engagement is how actually every process gets done. And so if the citizens are engaged in the process, then working with your elected officials becomes a lot easier. I should know that because I was one. And we really appreciate, honestly, we do appreciate people coming to us and talking about these topics that we have to make these great decisions on. Not only whether we do something, but whether we spend your resources to do it. So your engagement helps the process. Tonight, this conversation is with Dr. Kalmanoff. Now, I want to preface it by saying that we have not committed Dr. Kalmanoff to saying or doing anything. That's the first thing. I'm going to do a disclaimer like on television. This conversation is certainly only by the fact that you are here and your interests, your concerns, your questions will get to Dr. Kalmanoff in this first phase of the discussion. The first phase of the discussion is, what do we plan to do and what are you looking at? And so some of those questions will come from the floor. Please do not be upset with me if I try to minimize the amount of soliloquies that goes before your question. I do know how we do that because I sat through public participation also, and I've been one of them. So I do understand that. So please don't be upset with me at the end of this meeting. The other thing that we need to talk about, seriously about this is an issue of whether to build or not to build. If Shakespeare was here, we could probably reframe that poem and use it today. We need to talk about it in its physical sense of facility, but we also need to talk about it in its social sense as the impact on community. That's why we are here today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn over the opening remarks to Dr. Kalmanoff because I want him to be able to express his involvement to date and what his timeline and preferences and what he expects to do with all of your tax dollars that you've paid for. So Dr. Kalmanoff, I'm going to turn it over to you right now and let you do your opening remarks.
Okay, thanks, Carol. Oh goodness, are you hearing me okay?
Yes, we are.
Okay, but on this end it's breaking up. Let me change it now. So it's been a couple weeks since I took ill and was not able to make a public hearing, and I want to start by apologizing for not making the last one for those of you who came out to it, and to promise that I'll make the next one, and if there's another one after that, I'll make it. And just to say that we're working hard on the draft. It's not a fixed or set in stone product just yet, so your input is viable and probably more timely now than ever. That the study, if you recall, is a study of the entire criminal justice system, not just the issue of jail by any means. And it starts by saying, you know, what is the system and where are the gaps in it that make for inefficiency or crowding or overuse of the jail? And what are the policies and practices that could be amended to remedy that? And then after assessing demand, after it was corrected, for example, what would the needs for beds be, if any, and how many in the county jail? And I think you all ought to be thinking in terms of the concept of replacement beds and net new beds. And replacement beds may very well be fewer beds than are replaced. In other words, you could knock down the old jail and build fewer beds to replace it than the old jail has. There's no fixed answer to that question. At the draft stage, there'll probably be options. But at the final stage, we'll take a position on that based on the analysis. Last and foremost, I hope that the discussion here tonight includes some consideration by you all about why do we have a jail to begin with. Here where I am in my town with my values, the issue of jail is to house people who are dangerous or who need to be held to appear in court to protect our justice system integrity, and for no other reason. In other counties, the citizens have a right to sort of think more broadly, and that's you. You may think that you want more things done with your jail, but I think one of the purposes of this evening is to get a grip on what purposes you think the jail should serve. If somebody's dangerous on your front porch at 2 in the morning, you value a jail, no matter how anti-criminal justice or how anti-jail you are. And if somebody is a neighbor who did something minor or a homeless person who did something undangerous, you may think that it's not worth your tax money, or it's not even appropriate sanction or punishment or program response to have a cage to put that human being in. So those are the kind of key issues, and I'm open for questions, and I'll do my best. I'm sure I will describe or leak some of the things that are in this report to you tonight, but my objective is not to brief you on the report, but to get your input to it. I'm ready.
Okay, thank you. He's ready. So why don't we do it this way? Because Dr. Kalmanoff is not here physically, it's a little harder to interact with him directly. So what we've done is we've set it where Stuart is seated. Raise your hand, Stuart. He is our tech person for tonight. There's a seat right there in the middle. We want people to actually sit in that seat so that you could direct your question to Dr. Kalmanoff. You'll be on tape, and then, of course, we'll be able to capture all of the video at the same time.
And you should know that I can see you all really well.
Could I say, we do have a camera on a wire here, so we can pass this around the audience if people don't want to come all the way up here. You're welcome to, but it works either way.
See how he changed the rules that quick. But it's okay, whichever way you prefer. We want to make sure that you know that A, you're on camera, B, we like him to see you, and C, we are recording this so that we can share it with the rest of the people who could not make it here tonight. So I will open the floor and start. Now, remember, less soliloquies, more direct questions is what we like to do so that we can get in as many as we possibly can. And you can ask him anything that you like. Okay, so that's, I'll start with the lady who's just raised her hand.
Sure. Yeah.
What are the problems that you're seeing in the criminal justice system so far, and then in the jail in particular? Can you brief? I mean, I don't want you to spill it all, but I mean, it's nice to know.
You have to repeat it because I didn't hear the question clearly.
Or you can repeat it, Stuart.
I'll repeat it for her.
There you go.
She asked Dr. Kalmanoff, what are some of the things that you've seen in the criminal justice system here, in particular the jail, and what are some recommendations or basically best practices that you would recommend as a result?
Well, maybe the chief issue is that you don't have a well-developed pretrial release system, and therefore you have probably a larger pretrial population in the jail than you might have otherwise if you had a best practice kind of system. A best practice system would probably rely on a risk assessment instrument to inform the decisions of the bench, and eventually could even be one that was delegated to booking for misdemeanors so that it moved more quickly.
Okay, I'm
I
sorry.
could do more. But
No, that's okay. We'll take the
first one
next
that comes
question.
to mind.
We'll take the next question.
This isn't merely a question, it's mainly a statement of my opinion about things. I was recently assaulted by a black person. Not that I'm against blacks or anything, but I do believe that instead of jails, that kind of assault, that's merely a physical fight or something that I took in, that can be handled by a counselor rather than jail.
Well, how do you feel about a work program if there's going to be a court sentence anyway?
What do you mean by work program?
He doesn't
Something
know what
to
that
paint
is.
an old age home or clean a ditch or in some way pay
Oh.
back the community for the crime.
I've heard of that, that's a good idea.
That's not a break in reception. I heard you. I'm just listening to the next question.
She's raising her hand right over there, Stuart.
Thanks for taking our questions, Mr. Kalmanoff. I happened to visit the county jail. Where I should go?
Felt like a dental here.
Okay. Oh, now I see myself. All right.
I don't have him on here.
I spent some time at the county jail by volunteering at the library that we have set up in the community. And I see a lot of people who really do not belong to jail. And they have probably a whole range of mental problems. And I want to see what can be done about that so that rather than they end up in jail and spend time for the trial, they would be screened ahead of time before even going to jail, because going to jail is very traumatic. And these people who have some problems mentally have a worse traumatic experience. Is there a way to screen people ahead of time and then not send some to jail, or even if they are in jail, then lead them to mental health facilities or provide them care? Thank you.
Yes. Yes, there is. And let me just say that you already have a little bit of that in your county. Most of the police departments, some of the officers have had crisis intervention training, CIT training, which enables them to identify mentally ill folks in the situation that they find them in, and realize that the mental illness is the cause of the behavior rather than what we lawyers would call criminal intent, and divert them to a mental health program. The issue is twofold. One, there's not enough of it, and two, there's not enough places to divert them. And then the follow-on issues are there is gaps in the system so that the mental health providers in the community are not a neat fabric of a system, but rather a series of boxes unconnected. So we'll be making findings and recommendations about that, and it's a major issue to study.
Okay. We have a couple of folks here and then here. So if you want to take these two ladies and come this side.
Hello, Dr. Kalmanoff.
Yeah, why don't you all start calling me Cal? It's a lot easier to do that.
Hi, Cal. I'm
Hi.
Diana Zell, and I'm the president of National Alliance on Mental Illness for Champaign County. And I
Hi,
was
Diana.
unable to meet you when you were here previously, because I was out of the country. But I wondered if you had an opportunity to actually talk to people who have mental illness and who have been in the custody of the police and have heard how this has affected their mental health and their outcome.
Well, only a few in Champaign County, but I spent 2 years as the federal master over all 58 California prisons on the giant mental health case that's since gone up to the Supreme Court and led to many changes out here. Talking to them night and day for 2 years in that job.
Sounds like you're pretty well informed, and I'm glad to hear that. And I wondered if locally we are any different in what you've been finding out as you're doing your research.
You know, it's a dangerous question because to say it's a big problem everywhere excuses it, and it's not to be excused. It's a very costly problem everywhere. It costs all the communities that are afflicted by it, which is most, because they spend more and accomplish less because they don't have a proper response to the mentally ill. Y'all have a pretty decent structure, but it's just not filled in, and it's not coordinated, and it's not big and robust enough. We plan to provide the system recommendations to enhance it.
Thank you for answering my question, and I hope that we can help you in any way whatsoever. We're standing ready to do so.
Well, this is certainly a help, let me tell you.
You could pass it to her right next to you, then we'll move this way.
Hi, Cal.
Uh-oh.
My name is Jessica Watson, and I'm from Champaign, Urbana. I have schizoaffective disorder, and I was wondering what you think about meds and the difference between when people go to jail, if they're carried away by the police people. I haven't been carried to jail, but I've been carried to the hospital in a psychotic state. And I just wonder what you think about people getting, how fast they get their medicine in jail compared to how fast they would get antipsychotic medicine in a hospital situation with preventative care instead of going straight to jail.
Well, this is a really important issue that I've already actually raised in Champaign County. The issue of integration between public health and jail health and hospital health, where the continuity of the meds is maintained. And it's a problem that we're addressing in the report, actually addressed in public hearings with the county medical board, Mr. Tracy and friends, 2 months ago. And it's a big issue, and you've got it right, and we're addressing it head on. You've got to have, I mean, if nothing else, you don't want to have a mentally ill person wherever they are interacted with in the criminal justice system harmed more by their contact with the mental health system or made worse. That's counterproductive.
We'll come back to you. We'll come back. Just come on this side. No soliloquies.
This is good.
You're on your side.
Oh,
Okay,
hi.
you can ask your question.
Hi.
Okay. I'm Sister Patsy. How are you?
Very well. How are you today?
Okay, you know, what I wanted to sort of highlight, since you aren't from this community, and I want to live where you live, where only the people that need to be in jail are in jail, because that's not the case here.
It's not the case here either.
Oh, okay. I thought I had heard you mention that, the people in your jail,
Okay.
but that's okay.
Those are my values.
Oh, okay, so, I just wanted to point out some of the things in our community, and I just want to say one quick thing. I was talking to my stepson last night. He pulled himself up literally by the bootstraps. He has a good job. Now he drives a truck, he works in construction, and he took his son to work with him, okay? He's of color. So he says to me, you know, the police followed me for 5 blocks, and I kept turning to make sure they were following me. I bet if I was white, I could have took my son to work. The reason I'm saying this is because this is the rule, not the exception, okay? And if you're stopped and you haven't been able to hook up your insurance or whatever, you go to jail. This I know, because I've been on the ankle bracelet for them kind of offenses. So that's one. Number one, our jail has a tremendous amount of traffic violations. Not violent criminals, not somebody that's going to hit you upside the head and take your purse, but traffic violations. While I was getting my little ankle bracelet, there was all kinds of mental health stuff going on. So that's another thing. It's full of people with mental health problems. The other thing is just, you know, you hate to talk about money. My mother always told me it was a little crass. But you know what? We don't have the money for this jail. Everything's being cut. I mean, I don't know why I'm saying this, because everybody knows that. but childcare for women, young women working, you know, mental health facilities, everything across the board is being cut. You know, in the U of I has lost many jobs. All around here we've lost jobs. It is insane for people that we elected to think about spending that kind of money, 20 million, and after, at the end of so many years, they said $56 million on something that's broken. And it is broken. You know, it's broken because it's broken. I'm
Okay.
going to give somebody else the floor now.
Thank you.
Well, no, it's going to be me. Let me get.
Oh,
let me
okay, put it on.
That's fine. So race, traffic, and money. First of all, on the issue of race, we are going to deal with the issue of racial disparity in the criminal justice system. It's a national issue, it's a state issue, it's a local issue, it's a hot button issue, it's a tough issue. It's very difficult to deal with, but we're going to try to deal with it and say something constructive about it, both with data and with findings and recommendations. On the issue of traffic, I think that has to do with the classification and use of the jail versus bracelets versus other forms of punishment, which are often called alternatives. And we're very keen on that as well, because why would you want to spend money on a cage to put somebody in for a traffic offense if you could punish them even better, more effectively, more of a disincentive for them to not drive recklessly or endanger the community with drunk driving by punishing them in a different setting, even a drunk driver motel or a soft kind of custody situation. So we're on that issue as well. With regard to money, first of all, I have never, ever, and I would like somebody to provide it to me if you have it, seen a $20 million jail proposal, and I've been working in the county since November. I know when I got there, that was the figure that was being thrown around, and there was a big fight going on. But somebody, and I see Jim Kilgore right there by the back door, send me the memo. If there's a memo that shows there's going to be a $20 million jail, I'd like to see it. But the jail situation you have now,
as I said earlier, there's a storm outside. So it could be messing up the technology. But in the meantime, this is my grandson Jaleel, who's not cooperating. Do we have it?
That was the number that before we ever got into hiring.
So yeah, I was going to answer that for him.
Thrown around as like that's what it would cost to replace the old one and build all.
Yeah, we.
Right. Yeah, and it involved media increasing that number. It's never been a number I proposed or that anyone I know has proposed.
Well, then bring it up too. So I tried calling you back at it.
So while we wait for Dr. Kalmanoff, I wanted to finish the statement, well, not finish his statement, but expound on the statement Dr. Kalmanoff was just making. As a county board member, one of the things I told you at the beginning that there was a lot of ebb and flow in this conversation. This is not and has not been an easy conversation, because when you talk about jails and jail culture, that's a very difficult conversation for communities. The figure of the $20 million was a estimate figure that Ms. Busey had sent out suggesting some cost analysis, what she thought. It was not a hard and fast number. But we know that jails cost more than that, right? In most cases, people spend a lot more than that. Unless you're doing a rehab, you're going to spend, in the long term, the actual construction plus the actual facility maintenance and continuation costs a little bit more than that. But we don't have a hard, fast number yet. Why? One, there's not been a decision about the jail at this point. Two, we're still working with Dr. Kalmanoff at this point to finish his assessment. We will get on the 30th of April to the public and the county board. His initial draft will come out on May 2nd, as we talked about earlier. There'll be a public meeting hosted by the county board at Brookings, where the discussion can be opened up further based on his initial draft. So that's where we are right now. You know, people want to argue that or not, you know, whatever, it's in black and white, but it was not a hard, fast number. And so we don't have that number on the table at all at this point. We have no number. And so now, Dr. Kalmanoff can take it from there.
I'm gonna hang up the phone.
Uh-oh.
All right. So I don't know whether you were able to hear that. Carol was responding to your.
Can you hear that?
I heard some of it and I got the gist of it. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so let me try to respond. I understand that when you first build a jail, just even 2 or 3 million becomes 20 million in staffing over the life cycle of that jail. It's a huge amount of money. But if you get sued for the jail that you have, it's a huge amount of money, and then you don't have the money to do anything about it. So you have to be careful about the cost issue here. We are not looking to build you a new jail that's big or unneeded. You have to take a look at the conditions of the people in the old jail downtown and the conditions of the people actually in the satellite jail outside of town, and evaluate the buildings and evaluate demand and evaluate what's needed. And there's probably going to have to be some construction, if nothing else, not to necessarily replace the old jail, but at least to have the kind of housing for medical and mental health that the jail desperately needs, and the kind of separation and constitutional conditions that the courts would require you if some of these upstate lawyers came down and sued the county and took your money for jails and programs instead of you being able to fix your system yourself. It's not a simple one solution situation. If you leave the jails the way they are, you got problems. But I do agree with the original statement that it's a huge amount of money to build any jail bed, even a single bed. A huge amount of money, even more so, to staff it. And I just wanted to make the point that the $20 million proposal, I have still never seen the $20 million proposal. I'd like to. But it is an expensive proposition, and we take that as a parameter of the study to try to avoid, but at the same time give you enough beds to house dangerous people or people who need to be held for trial because they can't be in any way assured appearance in any other way.
If you come around to the, so you can be in the chair area, we got a couple of people in front of you.
Okay, yeah. Who's on first?
He's in the chair.
Okay.
Let's go.
You may not want to address this because I don't know whether it's relevant or not, but if it is relevant, could you speak about the issue of restorative justice and whether that is something that can be done on a local level if it's not done on a state level?
Well, it's certainly something that can be done on a local level, and it's certainly something that should be done on a local level. You know, I'm big on punishment, and I've had debates with people about this for a long time. Restorative judgment is punishment because it's a response to a bad behavior, but it's a compensatory response appropriate to the badness of the behavior and to the goodness that needs to be put back into society to balance the badness in a simple sort of way. So, you know, if you knock down Johnny's erector set in the playground at a preschool, restorative justice says, well, you at least help him, if not altogether, and put it back together for him. You don't want to do that? Well, too bad. That's the punishment. You did the act, you have to pay the crime, pay for the crime. But it's not for us to dictate the sort of everyday granular details of restorative justice programs in your community. It's got to have to come from the community in part, and there's a major role you have to play in that, but there's certainly going to be recommendations in our report that say for those people who don't have to be in cages, other forms of punishment that are cheaper and more effective and more likely to stop recidivism and to rehabilitate are the order of the day, and restorative justice is a general label for those kinds of programs.
Could I ask a totally separate question? Is that cheating? Just in your,
Well, wait, there's a punishment for cheating.
in your experience, you've gone through this presumably many times. How often do communities actually act on the basis of rational considerations from your judgment, as opposed to taking rational considerations and then acting on the basis of political considerations?
Well, you're never going to get away from political considerations, and I've done this 400 times in one size or form or another over 40 years. But there are a lot of examples of counties that have implemented our reports. There's one county that implemented 76 out of 80 recommendations, took them 5 years. So it's not to be, don't be too cynical about the eventuality of it. And the fact is, politics are not a simple word that negates rational plan. It's not quite that linear. Politics is a word that filters through the vested interests of everybody, from the politicians' campaign contributors to you yourself. When you get to find something in our report that the politicians are about to implement and you call your board member from your district, that's politics. And it has to do with kind of a democratic process that's awful messy. But, you know, if you ask me if I'm optimistic, I haven't found too many counties more ripe to work with the political structure and the leadership of the county to reform the criminal justice system in a cost-effective and rational way. You're in a good position. We have to hope for the best.
Hi, Cal. This is Patricia Avery, the president of the Champaign County branch of the NAACP.
How are you?
Good evening. I was really happy to hear you say that in your report that you were going to be looking at the racial disparities, maybe in sentencing. I don't know. I'd be happy to hear you expound on that. And also, I know that our jails are full of poor people, people impoverished. But the big thing is that I want to hear you maybe talk a little bit about is that we know we have a so-called war on drugs, and we have many of our people that are locked up in the name of the so-called war on drugs. So how are you, or are you looking at those, at that particular end of the, you know, we got a lot of people being locked up for the so-called war on drugs, and so how are you addressing that issue in your report?
Yes, some, and no to the 3 points. Let me go back over it. Yes, racial disparity, but let's be careful about what that means. I'm fond of describing my wife's PhD dissertation, which found disparity between black and white in heart procedures. Blacks got 70% less of the procedures required than whites. But on examination, it was because the whites were in the videotapes, not the blacks. And the attitude of the patient wasn't considered, orientation wasn't provided. A lot of things got in the way of the surgeries. It wasn't necessarily the bigotry of the doctors. So it's more important by far to deal with the decision-making of the decision-makers than it is to deal with an underlying racism that's almost impossible to prove statistically, and that comes up from the second point you made of poverty in our society. If you're poor, you're on the street. We don't arrest hookers in high-rise buildings. We arrest them on street corners. We don't arrest people driving, doing bad things up in condos. We arrest them in cars. And so the lower socioeconomic class runs into the police and runs into law enforcement and to that war on drugs instead of the upper socioeconomic class. And in a, I have to say, racist society still is, the lower socioeconomic class is predominantly African American and other minorities. Not predominantly, but largely. So the way to deal with racism and the way to deal with racial disparity is to improve the information and the objectivity of decisions. So if you have a risk assessment instrument at every point where there's a decision, it's not that the risk assessment instrument with a score of how risky this person is should dictate the decision, because that's the constitutional officer's decision to make. They're elected and it's a structure there from the Constitution, but it can Good, I got you back. I don't know where you didn't hear me, but I'm gonna pick it up again. The risk assessment instrument can limit racial disparity by simply providing more objective data and more objective kind of scoring for whether or not to transport an arrestee to jail or just issue a summons, or whether to keep somebody in jail or let them out on OR rather than bail or keep them in custody, and right on down through the system. I like to stay away from sentencing because that's so much the prerogative of a judge, and it's no longer dealing with quite as easily a field that's easily subjected to risk assessment. Poverty I've already tried to cover, and the war on drugs, you know, I share your view of it, but it is what it is, and it isn't going away because of the study we do in Champaign.
True, but study nonetheless, right?
Well, you're certainly going to see data on how many drug offenders are clogging up your system. You have a pioneering drug court in your county. Your judge who started it won a national award 2 days ago from President Obama. It's not irrelevant to the study by any means, but you know, I try to take stuff on that I can help you with, not stuff that I can just run my mouth on. So talking about the war on drugs, a guy from Berkeley coming into Champaign talking about the war on drugs is it's kind of like, you know, blowing in the wind.
Well, thank you for that.
Hi, Cal. I was wondering if you have just a ballpark estimate of numerically, if we, you know, aggressively pursue proper use of bail, ankle bracelets, all the non-cage techniques, especially pre-trial, how many people are we going to be able to reduce the jail population by just pre-trial, and then, you know, with some of the same techniques post-trial?
Well, you know, for me to speculate on that means you won't read my report.
Right. Fair enough.
Hi, Cal. It's me, Ann Russell again.
Hi, Ann. How are you?
Oh, I'm hanging in there, and I hope you are too.
I am.
I have a question about the $500,000 worth of mental health and physical health services that are being provided by an independent company to the jail. And I used to believe back in the 70s that private business could maybe do things cheaper than the government, but I've come to change my mind. And I wonder if you might be making a recommendation that we bring that money back here locally, where people understand the system here and who is where, rather than somebody that is never going to see this person again if they can stay out of jail.
I think I'm going to stay away from cutting it the way you've cut it, but more or less try to address it in a different way. You all have your government and your bureaucracy, your leadership, your criminal justice system has the ability to generate its own mental health programs and do that work. And in the past, I've been part of evaluations that have shown that it's done terribly. Your government also has the ability, and the bureaucracy and leadership of the justice system, to do that on contract to private providers in the community that you might call business, but are actually probably less than General Motors and Chevron and more like a nonprofit down the highway from you. There are problems. You know that because you were at some events that I was at where I tried to name some of those problems, and others did too, in the current system. to mean that it should be back to public rather than private just because there are problems is too sweeping and too simple. I think you got to solve that one locally with your mental health board and your own democratic institutions. The issue is a system that works. It's not how it's put together, private, public, etc.
Well, the thing is that we need, and maybe we can find it locally, we need money for more psychiatrists. Medicaid does not reimburse mental health centers for psychiatrists.
I know. But you know, you were at the 2 mental health meetings that we had, if I recall.
Yes, I was.
And I stirred up as much trouble for myself and everybody else as I could. I think your mental health board has been activated.
Oh, I think so too.
And I think that y'all ought to be attending those meetings and staying on it, because y'all want the same thing. You want a seamless mental health surround to avoid people having to go to the jail because there's no other alternative, or failing because they go to jail in between alternatives.
Okay. Well, stay well, okay?
Yeah, I'm doing good, thanks.
If you want to address Dr. Kalmanoff, please go around and line up that way so you can stand for the chair. This conversation really is for the community to talk to him directly.
How you doing, Cal? This is Marlon Mitchell once again. Good to see you.
Hi, Marlon.
I got a quick question for you. You mentioned that on the national level, dealing with disparity, it's a national issue. And I wanted to know, here in Champaign County, we've never had a committee or anybody to address the issue. I was wondering to get your thoughts on creating or organizing a task force that looks into racial disparity.
I think that that has worked in many places, and in our report we will cite some jurisdictions that have done things like that. There are a number of ways to cut it. The one thing I would say is, if you do it in the community with no people from the criminal justice system's leadership involved deeply and part of it, you'll have a good time, but you won't accomplish much, and there'll be a divisiveness. If you sit down with the people in the system and do it together, I think you have lots of opportunity to make progress. But we are addressing this issue directly in our report and trying to make recommendations not that dissimilar from what you just made.
Hi, it's Ashley Berkson, and
Hi.
What do you think of the National Association of Sheriffs' solution to the first drunk driving conviction of requiring people to get a breathalyzer ignition interlock instead of revoking their license and making them lose their job and all the other dreadful things they do to them?
I spent 60 days in a drunk driver unit police car in San Diego one time, way back in my life. And I've never lost the impression of how terrible and dangerous drunk driving is. And so I love that solution because I don't think jail solves it. And that one seems to.
How you doing, Mr. Kalmanoff? My name is Martell Miller. I wonder how many counties you've been in that had 2 jails that's built in the last 30 years that's looking to build a new county jail.
About 100.
About 100 counties, so when you walk around the old county jail that they talking about tearing down and replacing, do you feel that it needs to be torn down and replaced? It can't be maintenance back up to standards?
Well, let me take it one jail at a time, okay? First of all, without wanting to violate your privacy, have you been in the old downtown jail?
Yes, I have.
Okay. You think that that's a safe and humane setting to house people?
I think if they did the proper maintenance, it could have been.
Well, it's true that if they'd done the proper maintenance, it would be in much better condition. There wouldn't be mold and fungus and ventilation and other problems that have been let to go to hell. But in the end, jail would still be not standard in terms of the size of the cells and the circulation, and it's very staff intensive and expensive. And so paying for staffing over time is more expensive than paying for new beds that are not staff intensive. With regard to the new jail, maintenance is a big problem, needs to be repaired, but I'm more inclined to think of getting rid of the old jail and adding a pod or some kind of better space to the new jail, perhaps for not as many beds as you've got now, or maybe as many, but certainly not a whole lot more. I haven't finalized the decision on that.
I have another question. Have y'all ever thought about taking the architects or some architect students to go in there and see if y'all can redesign this new jail? Because the jail is a steel frame building where you can tear down and redesign that building from the inside because it's a steel frame building.
We're looking at remodeling the satellite jail. We are, and we're looking at all these alternatives. I don't think they'll be finalized with our report. We have architects on our team.
I'm talking about the downtown big jail.
The downtown jail has universally been condemned by architects, engineers, maintenance people, corrections people, inmates who spent a lot of time in there, staff, as really beyond salvation.
Could you give them reports to the public then? If it's been condemned and y'all still using it, the public needs to see that information. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it will.
Okay.
The chair is empty and ready to be filled. So please have at it. No, they ain't run out of people.
Hi Cal, I'm Sophia, I'm sure you remember me.
Hi, Sophia. I do remember you.
I wanted to know, I read your report and I had kind of expected, we met with you the other month in person, and I would have expected to ask that you were going to do a 20-year trajectory on the jail population to estimate what you think the jail populations would be. But I would have expected it to be based off of the last 20 years of this area. But in your report, I read that it's going to be 20 years out, checking at every 5-year interval, but based on jail populations surrounding. Why the jail population surrounding as opposed to the jail population in what the jail trends have been in this particular county?
Well, I don't know what report you're referring to, but I can tell you that you're, let me finish. Jail population isn't going to grow. And the projections, no matter which way you do it, other counties or your county or nationally, looking at your demography, your jail population is not going to grow. If anything, it'll decline. And that's without any changes in the system. If you change the system, it'll decline a great deal.
Okay, and also, as you know, I'm leading the Women in the Jail work group right now, and I wanted to know if you know if women who are incarcerated have contact visits with their children at this point.
Contact visits for women in the jail system are a real problem that needs to be remedied.
Okay, and let's see, seems like you had another question. You had another page in your proposal, that's what I meant earlier when I told you I was reading the information. You had another piece of information that was on a chart actually that talked about focus groups for studies. And I know one of the big groups is like incarcerated people with mental health issues. I wanted to know if during all of your 453 studies that you've done, have you ever made one of the focus groups women?
Oh, yeah. First of all, I had some difficulty putting together a focus group in Champaign, and I wasn't able to accomplish that. It's a question of something that you still might try to make happen, because I'm going to be in town the 30th, 1st, and 2nd, and the 1st is a good day. So keep that in mind. But I've done it before. I used to use Delancey Street ex-inmates to help lead those focus groups, and we've done it in a number of jail studies. I will say this, it's a satisfying experience for the women. They get to be heard, but it generally provides information that I find myself without the focus group. It doesn't change the study. It maybe adds dimension or support or authority, but it doesn't uncover some brand new thing. The issues are pretty clear. Jail is bad for mental health. Jail is bad for families. Jail is bad for fabrics. But people who have dangerous people on their front porch want some place to lock up a dangerous person. And so in between those extremes, you have to have a good system.
Okay, and you said you would be here on May the 1st?
No. I'm going to be coming in real late the night of the 29th of April. And I'm going to be presenting to your board our draft report on the 30th. And I'll be holding another public hearing with whoever wants to come on the 2nd. And I'll leave early in the morning on the 3rd. So the day of the 1st is set aside for talking to the press, talking to community groups, talking to focus groups if you organize one, whatever you guys want.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We got time.
This thing is really going well, isn't it?
Hello, Cal. At the meeting of the mental health board, the sheriff was there, and the discussion was in regards to local providers versus the current services that are being provided, mental health services within the jail from, I think it's a Peoria firm. And the suggestion that the sheriff had made was that that particular company had expertise in working with the population, that maybe that expertise was not available locally. And I'm wondering if you can address that.
Well, I can address that by saying it didn't sound like a solid enough statement to go unchallenged. But it's not my job to challenge that. You're there. And the folks in the county need to work with their political and criminal justice leadership to figure that contract thing out.
Well, I guess my question as a follow-up would be whether within the criminal justice, practice of criminal justice and mental health services, whether there's whether certain firms specialize in it, or whether it's just mental health services are objectively evaluated and it doesn't matter, there's no differences in the population.
I don't think there's too many differences, but I do think the issue is integration, unification, a system, access, proximity, timeliness, and not a set of skills. The skills are around.
That's my question. So actually the proximity and some of those other factors, your report's going to address the importance of those issues versus the claim that perhaps only certain firms can provide adequate services.
No, I'm not going to get into that because it's too local an issue for me to make the call. I'm not able to go out to Sun Prairie, and evaluate a contractor for you. I'm not able to go in deep enough and objectively enough to compare local providers to out-of-county providers to out-of-city providers. All I know is you need good mental health services, and the system needs to be seamless. It's up to you and the community and the system leadership and the politicians to work out this conflict.
Hi, Cal. I'm Mark Ensling. And I occasionally take part in Community Court Watch. So I'm slowly trying to educate myself on what's going on with the criminal justice system here. And one of the things that I observe over and over again is it seems that there are incentives to overcharge people, and then that turns into plea bargaining and people having to make a terrible choice between confessing to something that they didn't do or think is not what they were should be charged with, versus risking what they think might be a hostile court. You're probably familiar with this as a pattern. I was wondering if in your work in other places, you've found some mechanisms or ways of addressing the incentives that lead to overcharging, that lead to people spending, like this guy I know that spent 2 years in the jail because of kind of wrong practice that involved court-appointed lawyers and police and staff in the jail. So I was wondering if you have ways of addressing that.
Well, I probably have a slightly different perspective on plea bargaining than you do. I've studied it, and I've engaged in it as a defense attorney, and I've engaged in it more from the prosecutorial side, and I've sort of supported it or watched it or tried to reform it from the judicial side. So I have a grip on it. And I will say this, if you didn't have plea bargaining, you couldn't afford hardly any criminal justice system, because 97% of all cases do plea bargain. What you have to concern yourself with is the part that you mentioned about systemic overcharging. And the way to address that is to make sure you have an adequate defense. And then you fight the overcharging. Times there are exceptions and situations where somebody is overcharged and jail is overused, and that compounds the felony, so to speak. There are other times when overcharging is used as an incentive to plea bargain to save the state money for a trial that really doesn't need to happen because everybody knows who done it. And you have to kind of look at it as administrative justice versus judicial justice. And judicial justice is very pricey. It's a Rolls Royce. Administrative justice is a bicycle made in Beijing. And you want administrative justice most of the time because it can be very efficient and very effective and very accurate. But the main issue here is defense. And we have some concerns with defense, and we'll be making recommendations.
Because that's one of the areas where the disparity does indeed come in because of the overload of court-appointed lawyers, et cetera.
You mean racial disparity?
Racial disparity and economic disparity.
Yeah, which go hand in hand. Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, again, we see that as an issue where the best way to improve the system of justice is to improve defense, because you're not going to improve the system of justice by eliminating plea bargaining. And you can't have much plea bargaining at the prosecution. No, but, you know, when you have plea bargaining, Mark, if you're the prosecutor, you're not going to immediately start dropping charges before a plea bargain. You're going to look at a bar fight, and you might charge, you know, assault and battery. You might charge assault with a deadly weapon if the guy threw the bar stool. You might charge resisting arrest if he fought the cop on the way out. And later on, you might drop it to a simple assault. But those 3 crimes did occur. And a prosecutor isn't going to throw the first 3 away right before plea bargaining. They're going to use it to get some kind of what they consider to be an appropriate sentence that the judge approves. So, again, think about the Chinese bicycle and the Rolls Royce. You want justice. You don't want bankruptcy. You got to have plea bargaining. And plea bargaining is always going to be a marketplace. It's more or less like when you go to the flea market. You don't make your your high offer when you offer something to pay somebody for something they're selling, and they don't price it at their low price. It starts off, and then it moves sort of towards each other.
Thanks. I'd just like to sort of clarify that I'm not talking about getting rid of plea bargaining. It's more like I'm inspired by your going towards alternatives and the instruments you were talking about in terms of assessment of risk, and that I was hoping that such thinking could be applied to policing and staffing and how people come before when they interact with lawyers on both sides.
Go to the bank and count on those recommendations.
Thank you.
Hi, Cal. I'm Mark Leff, and I'm on the board. I'm one of the members of the board of local ACLU, and I wanted to try to take advantage of your experience in making the sorts of recommendations that you're going to make. The presumably, one of the things that, that you deal with is a group of people who really didn't want anything beyond an expanded jail. And a jail that had, for example, better facilities for the employees, the sheriff's employees, something like that.
Wait. That's not a fair statement of the landscape that I found when I got there. Presumably, the sheriff was appalled by having to house people in horrible conditions and wanted some fix on that.
Okay. What I really was asking your advice on was what sort of resistance you anticipate having to your recommendations that go beyond the jail beds that might be constructed. What sort of misunderstandings you feel are out there about restorative justice, about alternatives that perhaps people in the community, and about the experience of people in the jails, that you feel that people in the community should try to do a better job of making decision makers aware of?
Well, that's a good question, the first part particularly. I'll just try to answer it this way. I'm fond of saying nobody likes change but a wet baby. So if I suggested that you look better without that beard, you'd react the same way I would to my beard. And my New York Times is not in the mailbox in the morning, I get homicidal. So if the people who are running the criminal justice system are going to get recommendations that come from left field and are very different and very shocking to their normal, everyday patterns, their context, their meaning, the predictability of their lives, and the sense they have of control over their own appointed or elected positions, you can be sure there will be resistance. And my career of 40 years has been checkered by resistance many times. But I have worked hard, and I think this event this evening is part of it, to lay a groundwork for this report, to get everybody's opinion, get people a little bit of a sense of gradualism and envisioning of what might be coming. I've been sending things to various public officials since the beginning of the project of model programs and successes elsewhere, putting them in touch with their peers in other counties, calling upon stuff they've already done themselves, which is very effective already. And I'm ever hopeful. I'm an optimistic kind of person. So part of my job is to try to plow the field, not just slam the seeds in the ground. No, I don't want to hear from this next guy.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to hear from me for a minute. How are you doing?
Because he's well informed.
Good, James. How are you?
All right. Well, I think for those of us who have kind of opposed this from the beginning, I think there's two things that motivated us. One is sort of a philosophical issue about the whole issue of mass incarceration, and that we felt that to expand the jail or to build new jail cells in this county was to continue on this disastrous path of mass incarceration that's been happening over the last 3 decades plus. And then secondly, there's a question of connecting that to the way in which the money is spent in the county. So whether or not, however many millions we're talking about for a jail, we also know that there's $4.5 million per year in public safety sales tax, which according to the ordinance, 95% of that is supposed to be spent on things related to construction for law enforcement purposes. We have $3.6 million in mental health taxes, none of which is used for adult criminal justice issues at the moment, yet we have this huge population of people with mental health issues in the jail. So my question, the concern is the report and the direction that is going to come out of this going to represent a fundamental shift in both the way we think about criminal justice, that we move away from this punitive, punishment-oriented system to something that's more restorative, more transformative, more focused on preventative. And secondly, is that shift going to be accompanied by money? Because we can, if we're going to allocate millions to construct new jail cells, and then we're going to talk about preventive programs, but we're not finding ways for the money to be put into place for those preventive programs to happen, then essentially it's just business as usual, and the alternatives are window dressing on continuing what's been happening in the past. And that's the concern that we've had from the beginning, is that fundamentally the way in which budgeting happens, the way in which resources are allocated, is not going to change the way things operate. We'll simply have commissions and task forces and project proposals, but we won't have anything that's actually backed up by the resources that are necessary to make that fundamental change. So I'm just wondering how that sits with the orientation of the report that you're compiling, and I hope it sits well.
I think it sits well. I think the report will be a toolbox for democracy, but the people who will effectuate democracy are in a room over there in Champaign and Urbana. It's not here in Berkeley. I can write a report that shows the cost ineffectiveness of over-incarceration, the criminogenic nature of putting too many people in jail, and not enough money into re-entry, not enough money into alternatives, not enough money into prevention, not enough money into rehab. I can provide data. I can provide recommendations. I can provide system solutions that relieve the system of a lot of expenses and therefore generate new money. Consider all of that a toolbox. But then comes the democratic part, where you have to influence the people who are in, running your county government and your county criminal justice system, who appear to me, from having dealt with them extensively during the course of this study, and you know and I know that they weren't thrilled to see me arrive, very, very welcomingly and very, very hospitably and warmly and openly, and have engaged me, not lay down and just given up on things they believed in, but talked. And also it's important to note a lot of changes have already been made because the study has been interacting with the leadership of the justice system. The jail classification system still isn't good, but it's a lot better than it was when I got there. It's going to get a lot better when the recommendations come out if they're implemented. There are a lot of recommendations that, are going to have to be vetted and talked about and discussed. And it's going to be long after I'm gone. I hope you keep me posted. I'm glad about FaceTime that I can keep track of you guys, that I'll find out, the answer to your question ultimately.
Can I just make one comment? I mean, I think I agree with part of what you're saying, in the sense that we have seen a fundamental shift in some really looking for new ways of thinking on the parts of people that are involved, from the county board and from people who are involved in the criminal justice system. But there's still a long way to go to make sure that equates with some kind of fundamental change in the way things are done.
Well, let me come back at you too before you leave. You have to kind of hug the criminal justice folks. You have to stay right on them like white on rice. Don't leave them, because you want to make them do what you want them to do. You've got a toolbox from me coming at you that will help you do that. If you fight them first, rather than hug them and encourage them first, you're going to have, conflict. You and I know very well that conflict sometimes is instrumental to making change. However, the conflict has already sort of happened a bit in your community, and at this point in time, there's a readiness for change that I haven't seen before, and I think you might want to capitalize on that before you pull out your boxing gloves again.
Well, I don't have my boxing gloves, but I'm probably not quite ready for the hugs yet.
I'll hug you, James. So will I, James. Also, the sheriff. Yeah, we're the sheriff.
I'm Anna, and I just wanted to start by saying I think a lot of people in this room are really excited that you've said that racial disparity is going to be something that you address pretty directly in your report. And I think, you know, you've seen us time and time again talk about that being very important. That was part of the request for proposals and the call by the community. I guess I wanted to have give you an opportunity to talk about examples from your past where you have dealt with racial disparity in counties or communities that you've worked in, and specific things that you've done to sort of deal with that in other communities.
Well, it varies so enormously that it might not be as informative to you as you would hope, but I'll name a few. You know, I spent a long time in San Diego developing a curriculum for police training that was called the Field Interrogation Training Curriculum. It was designed to tell cops how to better stop people on the street, what's now hostilely labeled racial profiling, and sometimes is, oftentimes called field contacts or field interviews or stop and frisk, the original contact between a police officer and people on the street. And because of socioeconomic circumstances, the majority of those people in some neighborhoods are going to be African American or Hispanic. And I worked on that curriculum before you were born in '74. And it was a revelation because we took all the cops up to San Jose and had them go out on the street and get stopped themselves. We set up circumstances so that they act suspiciously. San Jose cops encountered them, stopped them, talked to them. There were all kinds of stories that came out of that, some funny, some scary. We all went back to San Diego and we developed a curriculum with the cops around that issue. How do you stop people who might be carrying a gun, who might have assaulted your girlfriend, who might be on your porch tonight, they're acting suspiciously, and at the same time leave them with their dignity if they're innocent of any wrongdoing, or you have no right to interfere in their freedom, and do it in a way where you don't get a complaint if you're the cop, the community isn't alienated from cooperating with the police, and everybody goes home happy. That's not really possible in practice, but it's a theoretical objective of that curriculum. So I started with that. Maybe even before that, I'll say that my first police lineup, when we were about to go out on patrol, the sergeant said, I want you all to make a lot of arrests tonight. That means protect our citizens from criminals, but don't piss anybody off. Now, how could we have done that? See, so you have to remember that this is a complicated world of, there are criminals out there, some of them carrying guns, who are violent or predisposed to violence and don't care about your rights, and you do need cops, and you do need a response to those people, and you do need protection from them, and you do need jail cells. Now, racial disparity, the way I use the word, is a neutral word. It means the difference between the number of people in the population and in the jail of various racial groups or cultural groups or gender or whatever it might be. Disparity. And I mentioned at the beginning of the hour, my wife's dissertation was on racial disparity and gender disparity in heart procedures. Close to my heart, that particular study is. So she found a 70% disparity. Black folks didn't get the indicated procedures for chest pains that white folks got by 70%. Women didn't get it by 50%. They were sent home for marriage counseling with chest pains, and the men were given angiograms. Now, why was that? Was it the racism of the doctor or the cop? Was it the racism of the nurse or the intake worker in the hospital, or the jailer or the judge? Or was it the institutional racism of society leaking all over everybody? Or was it other things that could be remedied much more easily? For example, a risk assessment instrument says you score somebody's dangerousness based on objective criteria, and you validate those scores to see if they predict dangerousness. And you use that score as part of the decision-making about whether you arrest or don't arrest, whether you keep pretrial or you don't keep trial, etc., right on down through the system. then you have really added some protections against unaware bias or deliberate bias. So that's how I think about it. Now, have I run into that? Yeah, everywhere. Birmingham, Alabama, Montgomery, Alabama. I mean, it was a big issue. You know, I had changed motels every night. In other places, it was under the surface. It's always there. We live in this society that we live in. It is what it is. But am I going to try to provide help to everybody? Yes. Is it going to be accusing of racism? I'm not ready to prove racism. I don't see racism. I see kind of bad decision-making that is not as well informed as good decision-making could be at times.
So the two examples I heard you give were the risk assessment mechanism and then this police training curriculum.
Yeah.
Those are sort of the two that you've implemented in other places?
Those jump to my mind as the big ones, yeah. There's lots of stuff that's come up elsewhere. You can talk about means tests and other kinds of socioeconomic criteria used in program eligibility. You can talk about, there was a county where we said they were basically using the jail as a pauper's jail, and it was unconstitutional. We just said it that way because poor people went to jail for not paying their fines. And they stopped that after I mean, there's a lot of more modest, I shouldn't say modest, but smaller level recommendations or findings or aspects of other studies that we've done. But this is a hot button issue, and you know, there's some concern I have coming from the outside and making judgments about local people that I can't find grounding for. I am providing data on this issue because we collected data on this issue, and we were provided data on this issue. But I think this is an issue that takes time, patience, tolerance, and work to overcome. And I think you have the local officials willing to do it. I don't find people snarling at me when I talk about it.
We're eager to see your recommendations.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Joyce Mass. I'm very concerned about reentry because people who go to jail mostly get out of jail. And I'm wondering how your report is addressing that, and also recidivism. I'm thinking primarily of people who have been in jail, or maybe they've even been in the federal system, and they just find it too hard. So they do something to get themselves back in jail because they can't figure out how to make it on the streets. How are you addressing those two issues?
First of all, I want to make my own opinion known about the last thing you said. I have not met anybody in 40 years who tried to do something to get to jail, except a snitch that was afraid of getting killed for snitching once. But I have met a lot of people who are destined to go back to jail just as they leave, because they're going to go home and find some stranger in their bed or no bed. They're going to go home and find no way to make a living except on the same corner with the same illegal trade. Or they're going home so ill-prepared housing and substance abuse-wise that it's destiny that they'll be back within a week or 10 days. So reentry is a big issue for us. We have a separate section on it. It's modeled after the reentry program we did in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania that cut recidivism by 50%. It's a little bit more appropriate to the scale of your community. It's a challenge that will involve the community, not just the system, because it requires the involvement of families. It requires the involvement of community groups to make reentry real.
Well, I definitely know of a person, Hispanic, who was out of jail, who had 2 jobs, who had to pay such a fine, and he lost one job. He couldn't pay the fine, and he said, I can't make it. So he did do something deliberately to get back in jail. I know this person personally.
Well, I will take your word for it rather than challenge your facts, but I think the issue that's really important to Champaign County is to have a reentry program, not presuming that people are trying to get back, but presuming they need support to stay out.
Right. So that's my question. So I'll be eager to see what your report is.
Like I'm fond of quoting a famous joke of a comedian that I used to know. I hope I'm funny.
No, you're a hoot, yeah.
Hi, my name is Ken. Thanks for the opportunity to have a conversation with you. I teach, so I'm interested in young people, and I think part of what you're speaking to is this idea, I think a lot of people here share, that of course it's much better to educate than to incarcerate. But I was wondering, in this particular case, whether, if at all, you'd be dealing with the question of juvenile justice.
No.
All right, and that to me was quite odd, I think. I'm not sure if this is specific, but I was pleased to hear that you didn't project an increase in incarceration, but it seems to me that the trend to incarceration seems increasingly towards younger people, and particularly younger people of color. So do you feel that that's not an omission that needs to be talked about as part of the broader criminal justice system? I was just also watching.
Ken, it wasn't my call. I agree with you that it's a logical omission, a policy omission, a system omission, but it wasn't my call. The county was interested in an adult facility and originally just a facility, and the community moved the county towards looking at the whole system as a way of looking at the demand for facilities and improvement of the system, and it was always adult. And so it's not, I hate to say the words, but it's not in my contract.
Yeah. Well, I was encouraged that you were going to go broader than the terms of the contract, because you spoke about not just an anti-jail, but the criminal justice system that's of course includes a whole range, incorporating the juvenile justice. I was just watching on PBS the great documentary on the Central Park 5. I'm sure you saw that already. And again, one of the concerns I have as a parent, as an educator, whilst I agree we need cops, I don't know whether we need them in schools. And a lot of the pipeline from schools is towards this trend of incarceration. So I think the juvenile justice problem and issue, particularly of inner city, kids, is in my view. I hope that you'll make some statement as to, what in your toolbox of democracy we should be doing about it here.
Well, my daughter goes to an inner city school, and she came home and was very happy to have the cops there. And I think you can look at that both ways. They didn't make any arrests; it hardly ever happened. But their peacekeeping abilities were legendary. But more importantly, I think I don't have a choice. I want to do a good job. I want to change those things about your system that are ineffective and inefficient. And I want to make it a better criminal justice system. And in order to do that, I got to stick with what I've been assigned. I've broadened it in a lot of ways at the adult level. You're right. But I can't create expectations that I can't meet. If you want a juvenile justice study, you should go to your board and get one. Not even sure that we'd be well qualified to do that as we are the adult, but we might be interested. But you can find people who are good at doing that, and you can get such a study, and it might be that your experience with the adult study might lead you towards that.
But I hope there's some leverage from your study to be able to motivate for that. But thanks a lot.
Me too, thank you.
I don't know why not. Who's next? Hello, Cal.
How are you doing?
It's fine, thank you. We have a really diverse and eclectic audience here tonight, and I'm really impressed with the turnout and the diversity in terms of its representation of the community, but it is still small. It really only reflects those people that are involved in the criminal justice system and citizens that have been personally engaged in this issue for a number of months. And one of my questions is after you complete your report and give it and submit it to the county, basically you're done and you'll go back to Berkeley and the county will have to debate and discuss what it's going to do with those recommendations. And I'm wondering if part of your recommendations might include something along the lines of some advice for the gatekeepers of the criminal justice system or elected officials in how to broaden the discussion as they begin to deliberate and make decisions on this to include the broader community. Because I had a discussion with the county board chair about this issue and asked if there might be some public forums or meetings where the public can come and discuss with the county board some of the recommendations or what expectations he had for reaching out. And he said, well, we're going to have a study session and the public can come to the county board meeting and they'll have their few minutes to speak to it. And somehow that didn't seem adequate in terms of the immensity of what we're talking about here in terms of getting a broader community buy-in. So my question my question is, do you have some suggestions to encourage or for the county board or elected officials or the gatekeepers, the necessity of them standing up and becoming advocates or encouraging or suggesting ways to engage the broader community to understand what you're saying and why some of these things are important to be accomplished?
Okay, I've got 3 or 4 things to say real quick. I used to call my mom up, and the first thing she'd say is, why don't you ever call? And the next thing I would say is, I'm calling you now, Mom. So this evening is certainly something for what you want. Last time that I missed is something that I picked up on, something that we all wanted. After the meeting on the 30th of the board, there's going to be a public hearing 2 nights later, just like this one. It's up to you to fill that room, but I certainly am not averse to a 3rd one. And I think your overtures towards your board are where this needs to go. I'm not sure that it is better not to have these public conversations once the report is out. And if you're asking me, are we going to recommend that there be hearings about the report? You know, before I recommend it, I've got to believe that that's a good recommendation coming from me, from our organization. I have a feeling that that's something that's maybe a good idea, but I think I don't have the right angle to make that recommendation, because I feel like what needs to happen is that the board needs to take into account our report and go forward and implement it. It's going to have an action plan at the end. It's not going to have a question mark.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Raptor, and I wanted to say that I'm excited to hear about and encouraged to hear about the emphasis that you're putting on mental health issues and on other ways to reduce the jail population. I have, I guess, a question. If I understand what you've been saying about the issue of disparity, is that socioeconomic disparity in arrests is explainable in terms of just that the police have better access to the poor, right? So they run into them more and they can arrest them more, and then racial disparity is explained by the fact that most of those poor people are of color. Is that
that's not quite it. There's one more thing to say. That the middle and upper class have access to the civil justice system. And so when you hit an upper class person up the side of the head and you're an upper class person, you don't have to necessarily call the cop, get a guy in jail, and get a jail sentence out of it. You can get a lawyer and sue him for his assets and get damages. So what happens between the first 2 you mentioned and the 3rd I added is that the criminal justice system tends to encounter the lower socioeconomic, and as you said, that's where the minorities are more frequent, and that creates a disparity. That disparity may not be in and of itself racism or wrong. It may just have to do with the opportunity and the access. But it still can be remedied in a large part where it's excessive.
So my understanding of disparity in the criminal justice system is that at many levels you can track it not just at arrest rates, but also in charging and sentencing and outcomes. And I know that, and it seems, I appreciate that you're a practical man and that you want to make recommendations that will be responded to well and won't, you know, alienate the folks that you're trying to influence.
Still in hearing. I do. I want. Okay. I just told my wife to. I just told my wife to pick up my kid from school.
So I'm wondering if you've looked at the data to see disparity operating at sort of multiple points in that process, and also if any of your recommendations include addressing the sort of the multiple junctures at which disparity exerts itself.
Well, yes and no. We tried to look at it, but I keep wanting to make clear to everybody in the room that when I use the word disparity, I'm not using it as negative. I'm using it as different.
That's how I'm using it.
Okay, so the question is where disparity that's different is also negative, meaning racist. Can we address and correct? And that we are also addressing. Now, how we're addressing it starts off most powerfully at the front end of the system for logical reasons. Because at the rear of the system, case by case, the judge is in a more or less inviolate position of discretion. And I think if you were appointed a judge, you would not want to be told how to make your sentences, because that's your job. And it's supposed to be so independent of any other influence that it's virtually sacrosanct. Okay, so we're tracking each other, good. So now, at the front end of the system, where the police officer stops you, let's say, for stealing an apple from a vendor, make a simple hypothetical, that's an arrest, and there's going to be a piece of paper written about it because you're going to have to show up and face criminal charges. The question is, are you going to be transported to jail? And when you get to jail, are you going to have to stay there pre-trial after you're identified if you weren't properly identified in the field? Or are you going to be released and come into trial as a free man to defend yourself? And those first two gateways, arrest and pre-trial, are the largest area of broadest discretion and greatest area of uncontrolled disparity of the kind that you and I might worry about most. So it starts there. I'd like to address this disparity throughout the system, and we try to. Certainly in terms of fees and fines and financial eligibility for programs, in terms of various other obstacle programs, there are some issues. But it goes downhill from the front end. The real issue is, are you in or are you out? If you're in deep trouble. And disparity starts there and gets worse because you're in. You don't have access to your support system. You don't have access to your resources. You don't have access to the best defense, etc. So that's where we start.
Okay, thank you.
You had somebody, Tricia.
I don't want anybody to fight over me.
Okay, Sister Patsy again. Dr. K, how are you? So, as I've been listening, a couple of things. One, you opened the door to talk about organizing techniques, hugging instead of fighting. And since you've been here a while, you know that we have some very good organizers. This is a town with labor organizers, community organizers. We have, that put into place. And so I think that I can say you said that it won't be a question mark at the end, but I think we haven't heard from the public yet. You know, we're sort of like skating around and what's Dr. K gonna say and what's this? But you know, we will be organizing to put some emphasis on things. You know, it's been a nice discussion, but I have a feeling that you're here for, I didn't understand that you were here to improve the criminal justice system. I thought you were here to make a decision on whether there should be a new jail. Is that right? I'm not being facetious. I just want to make sure I'm clear why you came.
They're hand in hand. We were hired to do a criminal justice system assessment to assess demand and potential for reducing demand, and then to assess facility solutions to the remaining demand.
Okay, so when we're talking about disparity, which I like to call institutionalized racism, I think that then you have to take that into consideration. You know, when we have all the statistics, one man over here Durrell has all the statistics about the stop, the racial profiling. You know, other people in the room have all the statistics on how many African Americans are arrested and the time link they're arrested to society. And you've seen all those. You're in Berkeley, okay? So you can't be that, you know, naive. Berkeley's Berkeley. So, I mean, do you feel that you can make an impact in this little area to make our path easier in this small area? Because we're talking about a national issue, but we got to deal with it right here. So you feel you made an impact to improve our criminal justice system as far as racial profiling, which leads to jail, people in jail that don't need to be there, and many of the other things, poverty that leads people to jail. So are your suggestions going to help us?
You know, I can't predict that, my friend, but first of all, I've gotten the data that you're talking about, I believe, has been given to me by various people in the community, as well as by people in the system, and we've collected our own. So the data will be there. Now, will it be data on racial profiling? Will it be data on racism? I don't know. It'll depend on how you interpret it. It's not high science. It's frequency data. It shows that there's a lot of stops of African Americans compared to white drivers. It does show that. But, you know, it doesn't show the subtleties of the situation. I will tell you this. Well, I don't think you do. I don't think you do, because I think you have to.
I know it. I ain't exactly like everybody else in the room. I've been at the satellite.
Have you spent a couple years in a police car as well?
No, just a little while.
So I've been on both sides, and I think there are a lot of subtleties in the situation. A lot of it is training, a lot of it is behavior, a lot of it is racism, a lot of it is crime control, a lot of it is public safety. It's not a simple picture. But look, the issue is going to be what I think I read in the very most powerful officials in your county want to do a better job on this issue.
I hope that happens, because a lot of people I love are victims of that. And so,
I understand.
You know, I hope.
But in a sense, everybody who runs the system is a victim of that too, if it's happened.
Yeah, we're a lot of victims out here. And also, you're not viewing a large part of the community that your decisions are going to impact. You know, yes, they'll impact the people in this room, but they won't impact the people that aren't, you know, the same way as the people that aren't here. And so I hope at some point you get to talk to those people and see what their horrible experience is, because every day I hear a new story. Anyway, I'm gonna go now and see if somebody else wants to.
Let me make sure in this public hearing, I make the statement that I have interviewed a lot of people in the justice system. inmates, people on the street, people who've been in the facilities, people who've been in the system, and the people who work for me who've been there have done that too. We're doing our best.
Good, thank you. We always need fighters out here. And I'm a fighter. I'm old though.
Not as old as I am.
Bet you want better.
Hi, my name's Terry Barnes, and I have two questions about the diversity in our county. The first is that there's a real town, and I wonder if these play any role in the way you're writing your report. There's a real town and gown divide in our county, in our community. Even though there are a lot of students, I think, don't wind up in the county jail. They're kind of different systems of policing and different standards, and I wonder if you've written about, I mean, if that's a dynamic that you cover in your report. And the second one, my second question has to do with your statement about how you don't think that the jail population will be increasing, and I was wondering, another aspect of diversity in our county has to do with immigration of farm workers and people who are sometimes kind of transient around the agricultural things. So we also have a big immigration issue here in our county, and I was wondering if in your writing, if you are how the issue of immigration and federal immigration laws have, if that's played any role in the way that you conceptualized your work on the county jail.
Well, you gave me an out, but the nice way you ended it. Yeah, they played a role in the way we're conceptualizing it. And they're very good questions. They're systemic questions in a way, but they're not exactly about the system. They're more the town and gown relationship and the federal immigration policy debate that's going on now kind of question. So on the town and gown, I'm sitting here in my office. I'm about 5,000 yards from UC Berkeley. I was faculty at UC Berkeley over 25 years. I'm familiar with town and gown. I've been on both sides of every issue for many, many years on the campus with regard to riots and demonstrations and mass arrests, with regard to police review boards, with all kinds of things. It's a big issue. I find it rather quiet in Champaign-Urbana, and it hasn't presented itself to me as the highest profile or priority issue. So if you see that as relevant to this jail study in a way that I may have missed, I urge you to get my email address and write me, because I'm very open to hearing it. It's not at all too late for me to do something about it. I did meet with the university police chief, and I did meet with the vice chancellor, and I do see the university as relevant to a lot of solutions to this system reforming and re-engineering itself to improve for everybody. With regard to immigration, frankly, I feel small. I feel like I don't want to get involved in a debate that I'm not a real big player in, and where Champaign in itself isn't that big a player compared to the national debate that's going on now. And I don't want to dilute my study. If you think I'm wrong, again, I invite you, because this is probably not the right arena, I invite you to email me and tell me where you think I could weigh in on it without diluting my study, because there is an immigration issue, an immigration hold issue, a question of how to deal with ICE arrests and all that. I don't deny it, and I don't deny it's important. I'm married to a refugee.
We're learning a lot about your family today.
My 9-year-old's going to burst in this room in a few minutes, and you're going to learn more.
Okay, well, there's some folks behind me in the line, so thank you.
I apologize to everyone. This is my second question, but I have to ask it. A lot of people who are in jail that I meet whenever I go there, they are there just because they cannot pay the bond. And where wealthier people of other classes, they pay bond and they don't end up in jail. What recommendations do you have to change the system so maybe rather than paying cash, there would be a different system? I don't know, or there would be like a fund put somewhere where they can borrow from and then post the bail.
Well, it's a pretty good question, you know, but I think that the way I would formulate it is a little different. I would say the question is, does money balance danger? And clearly it doesn't. A dangerous person with money can get out, and a safe person with no money, just short 50 or 100 bucks, can't. So we see that as a problem in your system, and it's a problem around the country. And we're using other jurisdictions that have made real change and reform in that area as examples in animating our recommendations to you. You want to do a risk assessment. You want to say, is this person dangerous? And are they likely to appear in court? And you want to do that objectively. And then if you need money to ensure their appearance, hopefully you can use other things to ensure it, like not money, but like contacts in the community, a reporting system where they're reminded to come to court, even to the point of some confinement in the case of an electronic bracelet or some kind of supervision so they don't have to be in jail. These are all things that are on our plate.
Yeah, because it's very discriminatory the way it is. And one quick thing about the downtown jail, something has to be done about it. Because I know this is how bad the inmates are situated. I mean, they get cold. So, I mean, you know, you have gone there, but to those who doubt that there is a need for doing something big about the downtown jail, I just want to assure them that the inmates are the ones who are suffering, actually.
Let me speak to that too. I don't know if that gentleman whose first name is Mardell is still in the room, but you know, I didn't feel like I answered that question as well as I should have. The issue of there you are. Well, let me just finish. I think the issue of the downtown jail is a serious one. It's a dangerous place to live in, and not easily remodeled. But I just take the lady's point, and I hope I didn't sort of dismiss your concern about reusing it. It's been studied, and it's kind of expensive to reuse.
I'm glad you mentioned my name because I got a question to that too.
Thank you.
Instead of using the downtown jail for locking up the criminals, could we just use the satellite jail and maybe put a pod out there and still use the office space and find another way to use the rest of that part of that jail?
Well, it could be, Mardell, but the other way to do it is think about the possibility of selling that site and making a lot of money on it and using that money to fund programs and doing the pod out at the outside satellite jail as you suggested. There's a lot of ways to do it, and we're not going to be making the decision. That'll be your board, but we're going to be featuring options of the type I just mentioned.
I've been informed that this will be the last question from the audience. Last round. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kalmanoff, for doing this. My question is simple. One of the biggest things I hear from the people in this community is they don't feel like they have adequate defense. How many additional attorneys and how many additional investigators are you going to recommend for the public defender's office?
Well, you'll have to read my report for a specific recommendation like that, but I will say this. You're right to be interested in the public defense.
Well, that's a good way to close it. Dr. Kalmanoff, Brother Aaron and I thank you. Hopefully we'll get to see you again when you come to town and maybe share. You do owe us dinner, right? So we'll
not only owe you dinner, I've been looking for you to give it back.
Okay. So we'll take you up on that. We do want to thank everybody for engaging into the first conversation. Let me make some announcements again, because it is important. There are several graphs and things that have been done by students of the U of I who's been researching this issue. Please take a moment and look at the graphs and the research that they provided here. It does help with educational attainment. The other part of that is that Dr. Kalmanoff will be here on the 29th, 30th, releasing his preliminary draft. We want you to get a copy of it. We want you to read it. We want you to talk about it and be prepared to discuss it with the county board on May 2nd. That meeting is at 6 p.m., is that right? 6 p.m.?
I believe it's on the 30th at 6 p.m. But you know, you won't have enough time to truly take that thing apart and read it. It'll be 150 pages in 1 or 2 days. So I suggest to you that you might want to divide up and get some different people to do different parts of it and respond to me in email follow-ups so that I can deal with the comments in a way that are more powerful.
Well, we will do it in both ways, Dr. Kalmanoff. I tell you, we appreciate our public participation, and the county would not be happy if we didn't show up. So we will definitely do that, and we will separate that workout to the group. And then I'm going to thank you again for your patience through this whole electronic process, and we hope to have him in the flesh here in another week, and I'll let Aaron close us out.
Yes. We want to thank Mr. Stuart Levy for all of his technical savvy and ability. I'm only 28 years old, but I still appreciate technology. I mean, I like to write stuff down, so we have to accept the new forms of technology. It worked out, Cal. We appreciate you taking the time to do it, and Stuart for putting it together. For Carol Inskeep and, of course, the library and what they provide in the space. Yes, indeed. I want to take the opportunity to say to everyone in the room. So when I came in from doing what I had to do, I came in late, but certainly to my surprise, pleasant surprise, there are lots of faces in this room who are not typically in the room for public meetings that CU Citizens for Peace and Justice calls together. And it's encouraging to us in that fashion that we can actually begin to work together to accomplish goals that are in the best interest of everybody in the community. And I know personally how difficult it is sometimes to swallow your pride, your ego, or whatever, and say, let's get down to the business of what's in the best interest of all the citizens. So I'm saying that I want to lead the way in doing that. I'm encouraging everyone else to do the same, and let's try to keep an open mind as we proceed forward to try to do what's in the best interest of everyone. And I think tonight was a perfect example of really listening to all the perspectives, weighing those perspectives, and then actually going back and thinking about them, talking about them, and seeing how we can come up with actual proposals or ideas that will work. I know that it's difficult. It's not going to always be easy, but I like the education part of it, because there are times as an activist we don't see the perspective of the sheriff or somebody else because we don't have access to all of that information. So again, I guess on behalf of CU Citizens, I want to thank everybody for coming, for taking your time out. I hope you brought umbrellas because it was raining pretty good when I came in. Am I missing anything?
May 2nd. Let's just go back and continue to work on it.
Yes, indeed. So we'll continue to do work, and I'm sure you'll do the same. Please don't rush out if you don't. Carol, how much time do we have? What time is it?
Till 9.
Till 9. So if you want to take a minute to mingle, talk, read some of the information, look at some of the information that the students have put together, we must value and appreciate their contributions. I thank you all for coming out tonight.